Hi everyone, I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast. It was my privilege to interview the Honorable Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. Dr. Esselstyn is an American physician, former Olympic gold medal rowing champion, author of the revolutionary best-selling book, How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and he has been a strong advocate for plant-based nutrition since 1984. Dr. Esselstyn has been associated with the Cleveland Clinic since 1968, and he presently directs the Cardiovascular Prevention and Reversal Program at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute. In this interview, he provides a great understanding of the underlying cause of heart disease, as well as all underlying vascular diseases, such as diabetes, vascular dementia, high blood pressure, and Alzheimer's. He says it's damage to the endothelial vessels and loss of nitric oxide. He explains how, despite reports that olive oil and other oils are beneficial, they actually harm the endothelial vessels and should be avoided, especially for those with known heart disease. He shares his views on why modern medicine and cardiology are failing, and what patients need is a provider that listens and respects them and gives them the understanding of the root causes of their disease. He says that time spent with the patient and information shared actually empowers the patient to take control of their own health and their own destiny. Cardiovascular disease is not malignant. It can be reversed through a plant-based diet, and he provides the evidence for it. You will leave this interview knowing you have the power to change your life and improve your health. You don't have to be a victim to your genes or to chronic disease. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. All right. Hi, Dr. Esselstyn. Thank you for being with me today.
It's my pleasure.
So I wanted to kind of start this series on what's killing us in America. And obviously, heart disease has been killing both men and women as the number one cause for a very long time, despite advancements in medicine and technology. And I mean, we're spending billions of dollars on procedures and medications. So from your perspective, where has traditional medicine and cardiology gone wrong?
Well, we have to look at just the history. It's been really, for about 100 years that we have known that there are multiple cultures on the planet Earth where cardiovascular disease is virtually non-existent. And the characteristic of those cultures is they largely thrive on whole food plant-based nutrition with a minimal, if any, oil. And for some reason or other, we have really not grasped that information. And it's really, I think, quite embarrassing to think that you can look at Okinawa, you can look at rural China, you can look at the Central Africa, the Papua Highlands in New Guinea, the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico. Where's their heart disease? Non-existent.
Right.
I mean, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to recognize that we're all experts agree with this disease is that where it has its inception, its onset, its beginning, is when we progressively injure the delicate innermost lining of our arteries, the endothelial cell. And the endothelial cell is remarkable because it produces this absolutely magic molecule of gas, nitric oxide, which is responsible for the salvation and the protection of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable functions. And when you think about it, what are those functions? Well, nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Keeps things from getting sticky. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from ever developing any blockages or plaque. So literally, everybody on the planet Earth who has cardiovascular disease has their disease because by now, in the previous decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into a train wreck that we no longer have enough nitric oxide left to protect ourselves from making blockages or plaque. But the good news is that this is not a malignancy. This is a benign foodborne illness. And once you can get patients to understand that never, ever, ever again are they to pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further endanger an already train-wrecked endothelium, then the endothelium begins to recover. We'll make enough nitric oxide so we can not only halt disease progression, but we often see examples of disease reversal. I didn't mean to take up all your time on that.
Yeah, no. I honestly, I feel like I'm so glad you're talking about the underlying cause as nitric oxide and endothelial dysfunction. I had the honor of interviewing Dr. Nathan Bryan on the podcast, and he was wonderful. And I just became interested in nitric oxide, and he says it's the root cause of most chronic diseases. And I agree. It's like, we're talking about heart disease, but really we're talking about diabetes. We're talking about insulin resistant, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's. All of these have to do with this endothelial cells. And I think even with COVID, the damage, the oxidative stress has increased. There's endothelial dysfunction and loss of nitric oxide. And so when I feel like it's just crucial that people have that understanding of why this is so important and why nitric oxide is so important. Like you said, it's the most potent vasodilator we have. And I think many people just don't understand that. And they don't understand that it's the constant insults that eventually cause these problems.
Well, what we found in our research is that once you can get patients to stop ever again passing through the lips something that's going to further endanger an already injured endothelium, then it's a no-brainer. I mean, literally, as soon as you get a patient with heart disease to understand they caused the disease by destroying their endothelial cells, why would they want to go out to a restaurant and destroy some more endothelial cells on their wedding anniversary?
Right. Well, don't you think that, with the keto diet and some of the people, we need to eat like our hunter and gatherers. I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion. You've got people that are saying, no, just eat meat, just, this. So I do think it's confusing. They don't really get it, Yeah,
no, because when we conduct once a month our intensive counseling seminar for patients who have cardiovascular disease, we have a success rate of compliance of about 89.3, almost 90% compliance. How do we get that compliance? Because you show the patient respect. How do you show a patient respect? You give them your time.
Mm-hmm.
You think that you're going to make a change in somebody's lifestyle in a 15-minute office visit, you are smoking something.
Right.
I mean, that's not going to occur without the spouse.
Right.
Have the spouse, and then sit down and give them all the materials they want to read, but most importantly of all, have them understand what it is that the endothelial cells do, and how important nitric oxide is, and then really, how can anybody, when they've learned that now over a 5.5 hour period on a single day with handouts and everything, once they understand, but they're sitting there because they've destroyed their endothelial cells. Why would anybody with a brain in their head want to go out and destroy more endothelial cells?
Right.
But this is, I think this is really the whole reason that we succeed is because patients get the message. And I think that answers one of your earlier questions.
Yeah. I loved how I listened to you, and I loved how you described, honestly, was it 3 or 4 functions of nitric oxide, the
Yeah.
benefits? If you could just go through those, I thought that was really like clear, concise, and very understanding.
Well, yeah, what the nitric oxide does, it keeps all those cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Number
Right.
2, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number 3, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed, and thus protect us from having high blood pressure or hypertension. Number 4 is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from ever developing any blockages or plaques. So literally, whether you're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, wherever, anybody who has cardiovascular disease has their disease because by now, in the previous decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into a train wreck. We no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect ourselves from making blockages and plaque. But that's where the key is this. Have the patient understand that never again must they pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further endanger or injure their endothelial production of nitric oxide. Because when that happens, then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide so we can not only halt disease progression, but we often see significant elements of disease reversal.
You know, it's sad that heart disease is really starting in childhood. I mean, it's unbelievable what they have found, you know, on autopsies of young, you know, like teens through their early 20s. They have all this underlying cardiovascular.
Yeah, how about 12-year-olds?
Yeah.
Already body streaking. And there's a wonderful study, the pathobiologic determinants of atherosclerosis in the young, where they looked at the autopsy studies of young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who have died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. Coronary disease is now ubiquitous. In this country, you graduate from high school, you get a diploma, and you also get the foundation for heart disease. Not enough for your cardiac events yet, but there it is already, the disease is established.
Yeah, but it explains also why people die of massive heart attacks in their 30s and 40s. I mean, it started a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you know, it sounds so simple, but yet, you know, you've probably seen that cartoon where you've got the line of people, you know, for lifestyle changes. There's nobody at the window, but then the one for the pills, there's a huge line of people at the window. And I think that's true. I mean, when you're talking about lifestyle changes and that, it seems like, oh, it's a drag. It's this long process. I could just take a pill for this. And that's why I feel like it's so important to understand, like, no, this starts early. It's important to start now.
Totally.
So I listened to you and I just thought, you know, we have these other protective, you know, mechanisms such as the microbiome. And what is your thoughts on that role? Because we've been hearing a lot about the microbiome and the significance of it. How does that relate to heart disease?
Yeah, well, I think the work Stan Hazen from our institution was really quite interesting. He was looking specifically at, first of all, he was looking at the molecules of lecithin and carnitine. And those molecules are found in all the various animal products that we eat, from fish, meat, chicken, and dairy. And what seems to be happening, and when he takes those people who are omnivores and measures their blood after a bit, let's say several lamb chops, he finds a molecule called TMA, trimethylamine, which is the result of certain specific bacteria in the microbiome of persons who are omnivores, eating meat, those bacteria are capable of metabolizing the lecithin and carnitine in those animal products to the molecule of TMA, which is rapidly oxidized by your liver to TMAO, trimethylamine oxide. And trimethylamine oxide injures your blood vessels. But the other exciting thing that Stan Hazen found was that when he took somebody who was totally plant-based, gave them a lamb chop, measured their blood, no TMAO. Why? Because persons who are totally plant-based do not possess in their microbiome the bacteria that are capable of metabolizing the lecithin and carnitine into TMA.
Wow. Is that with all animal protein or just red meat?
No. I remember I said it's chicken, it's fish.
Okay.
It's beef, it's pork,
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, I wasn't sure because I think some people have the understanding, no, that's just red meat, but actually it's all animal protein.
Well, red meat has its own distinction, certainly. But even the World Health Organization in October of 2015 imagine this, countries from all over the world in agreement about the fact that red meat had the same level of carcinogenicity as smoking cigarettes.
That's insane. That's just crazy. I think that's why it's so important that people get this message. You think that people, hear it, but yet obviously we're still suffering from, death from heart disease and other causes. Even with things that people don't realize, like chronic back pain. I mean, you think the same thing is happening in all these vessels. Well, let's just talk a little bit about the diet. I know you advocate for, greens 6 times a day. And so what is the significance of that?
Well, let me because qualify that a little bit. In other words, if somebody has a diagnosis of heart disease and they want to pull themselves out of it, that is certainly one of the important items that we advocate, and I can go into the reasons and so forth why. But I don't want you to have your listeners feel that if they're absolutely free of heart disease, that they have to have the green leafy vegetables 6 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
But the rationale for that is obviously it's related to your earlier guest, Nathan Bryan, because by now hopefully your listeners know the importance of nitric oxide, but nitric oxide is age dependent. You never heard of a boy or a girl who's age 8 who had a heart attack.
Right.
They have nitric oxide blowing out of their ears.
Right.
Now, by the time they're beautifully healthy at age 50, your endothelial cells can only make 50% of the nitric oxide that you had when you were age 25.
Wow.
However, when you're over 80, you've now lost 70% of your endothelial nitric oxide production. However, through the work of people like Nathan Bryan and others, in the last 12 or 14 years, research has shown that in humans, there is an alternate pathway for making nitric oxide. And that's why I asked the patients to chew the green leafy vegetables 6 times a day. And I'll try to explain that right now if you've got a minute. Mm-hmm. Now, let's suppose that somebody has an angiogram and they have blockages in their coronary arteries. I try to ask them first to imagine shrinking their head to a size they could crawl inside that artery. They would see that blockage is an absolute cauldron of oxidative inflammation. So we need antioxidants, but no, do not go down to the health food store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant, because it doesn't work and it's going to be harmful. Mm-hmm. I need you to get your antioxidants from food. All right. Fair enough. What food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value, oxygen radical absorptive capacity. So this means that if you're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries with your morning oat cereal, that's a terrific start. However, nothing can trump the antioxidant value of green leafy vegetables. So I need you to chew, not smoothies, not juicing. I need you to chew a green leafy vegetable 6 times a day, roughly the size of half of your fist, after it has first been boiled in water 5.5 to 6 minutes or steamed until it's nice and tender. And then you must anoint it with several drops of a delightful rice or balsamic vinegar. Why? Because research has shown that the acetic acid from those vinegars can help restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme, which is contained within the endothelial cell and responsible for making nitric oxide. So I ask these patients to chew this alongside your breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with your lunch and sandwich. That's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course I adore it when you have that evening snack of kale. The second benefit from chewing the green. Chewing the greens restores your bone marrow capacity to once again make the endothelial progenitor cell. What do? The endothelial progenitor cell replaces our senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cells. Number 3, the third benefit from chewing the green, and this is absolutely the key. When you are chewing the green, you are chewing a green nitrate. As you chew the green nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria are going to reduce the nitrate that you are chewing to a nitrite. Now, when you swallow the nitrite, it is your own gastric acid, which is going to further reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide. So when you think about it, with minimal expense, with no hideous side effects, literally all day long, from dawn to dusk, morning to night, you are absolutely restoring nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which has given you this disease in the first place. Now, there's a caveat. Toothpaste with fluoride, public drinking water with fluoride, mouthwash, all will injure the beneficial bacteria in your mouth. And we like patients to avoid antacids because antacids will reduce the amount of gastric acid to the point where you will be unable to reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide.
That's so interesting.
Now, what other greens I'm talking about? They are bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collard greens, beet greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top 5 are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets. I guess that's 6.
I love that. What about if, do you feel like it's, well, I mean, like you said, no smoothies, but I know a lot of people use those for nutrition. Is it just, you don't think it's as healthy as it seems, or what is it?
Well,
or is it mainly just the chewing? Isn't it the chewing function that actually you're saying, converts the nitrate to the nitrite, and that's the important part?
One of the things that you've heard probably most of your guests say, you want to avoid processed food. Probably it was at the turn of the century, from 1899 to 1900, roughly in that era, that suddenly we began to see things appearing in a box, a bag, or a can. How many of those countries that we mentioned who never have heart disease, that is Okinawa, rural China, Central Africa, the Papua Highlands, the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, how many of them are drinking smoothies?
Right.
And there is some data to suggest that when you grind up, I mean, after all, these complex carbohydrates are loaded with fiber, and fiber is such an absolute key. It is really hard to document whether there's not something deleterious done from the fiber when you go ahead and really blend it. as opposed to chewing. Plus, one of my concerns is that if you put a smoothie strictly of greens alone, it's pretty tart. Pretty tart. So people will dump in an apple, an orange, or a banana. I have no problem with an apple, an orange, or a banana when you eat it as such, because the fructose is bound to fiber and the absorption is safe and it's slow.
Mm.
When you take the apple, the orange, and the banana, dump it in the blender, and then now you've blended it and you've separated the fructose from the fiber, it goes off in your stomach like a rocket, injures liver, glycates protein, and injures the endothelial cell.
Wow. Wow. That's good to know, because, yeah.
That's just something to think about. But
Yeah.
I suppose if you drank the smoothie that had been blended without any of those sugars, it might be safer, although you still lose some of the fiber benefit. However, I think that would be pretty tart.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, for those of you that, you wrote your book back in 2007, How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And obviously, not everybody, it's still very relevant today. But for those that haven't read your book or studied your work, I know that would be surprising. Could you just summarize what your study was and your actual findings and the length of time you observed these people?
Well, we did two studies on patients or disease reversal. The first was started back in 1985, which was with a group of patients who were seriously ill with cardiovascular disease. As a matter of fact, my late brother-in-law used to call them Essie's Walking Dead. We ended up with 18 patients, and it was largely men. It was nothing that I had against women. It was simply that that's the way the patients were sent to me. And those 18 patients, there were those who had failed their first or second bypass. There were those that had failed their first or second angioplasty, and then the rest were too sick for it or they had refused. And it was really quite exciting to see in this. It was a small group, but I was apprehensive about about whether we would succeed in compliance, because obviously when you ask these patients to give up the foods that are causing the disease, namely, I wanted them to totally give up any oil, any drop of oil, nothing with a mother or a face, meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, or eggs, no dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt, and no sugary foods, cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey. Also avoiding peanuts, peanut butter, nut butters, cashew sauce, avocado, and coffee with caffeine. And so the rock upon which I thought this study was going to flounder would be lack of patient compliance. And so the mantra that I used for these patients was the same one that I had been using for my cancer patients, that I had learned years ago from a wonderful West Coast surgeon by the name of Bert Dunphy. And Bert used to say that patients with cancer are not afraid to suffer. Patients with cancer are not afraid to die. But patients with cancer are afraid of being abandoned by their physician or by their family. So I saw every one of these patients for the first 5 years. Every 2 weeks, we would draw their cholesterol. We would check their blood pressure, their weight, and I would go over every morsel they ate. At the end of 5 years, they were now ready that at the end of 5 years, I expanded it to see them once a month. Most cardiologists see their patients twice a year.
Right.
And at the end of 10 years, they were pretty well on autopilot. So I was seeing them quarterly. Then at the end of 12 years, I wrote them up and published it in the American Journal of Family Practice. And that really made it probably one of the, if not the longest study of its type in the medical literature, because 12 years is almost half a career.
Right.
And it was really quite exciting to see not only how their symptoms disappeared, but how, when we carefully studied them, many of them were reversing their disease. And then, obviously, we had some angiograms that showed some startling reversal of disease. But boy, did I take a hit. I mean, obviously, what I was doing was an enormous threat to medicine's biggest cash cow. And Dr. Esselstyn, your diet is crazy. It's severe. It's strict, extreme. Patients will never follow that. And what makes you think you could ever do this with a larger group and get the same results? So we did. This time it wasn't 18 patients. This time it was 200 patients. 2 were lost to follow-up. So we had 198 that we followed for close to 4 years. And again, I had to use this time a little different mantra, because whereas those original 18 patients, they were all sort of geographically local. They could come to the clinic every 2 weeks. But with this second set, by this time now, patients were calling me from throughout Canada, throughout the United States, and also from overseas. So what we have done now, because still the major concern was adherence.
Right.
And if you're going to get a lifestyle change in somebody, you must show the patient respect. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I know to show a patient respect is to give them our time. So when we have patients who sign up for our seminar, I conduct it once a month, which now obviously we do virtually by Zoom. And the patient and the spouse at the seminar are going to hear over 5.5 hours all about how they created their disease, precisely how we're going to empower them as the locus of control to halt and to reverse their disease. Now, since I'm a little bit old-fashioned also, my secretary will give me a list. We usually limit it to 18 or 20 patients. My secretary will give me the list 2 weeks before the seminar, and I will personally call every one of them myself, so I can get my arms around their story, and at the same time, provide them with an opportunity to ask questions of me, so that coming to the seminar, we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward. I give them about 3.5 hours of science. And Anne, who's had 34 years of experience acquiring and preparing plant-based foods, has an hour and a quarter discussing food acquisition, preparation, restaurants, and traveling. And then we always finish up with in a chatterbox, trying to answer their questions. And we have either one or two previous patients who've had a gratifying experience, who will share their story, so that those who are in attendance, now they've heard the science, they've heard the practicality of the food, and they now suddenly say to themselves, listen, if he or she can do this, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And then we stay in touch as necessary through email or phone call. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much how the format works. And so far, as I say, when we looked that up and published that study in the American Journal of Family Practice in July of 2014, it was exciting to see that those patients who were compliant, 99.4%, had no further events.
Wow. That's awesome. It really provides so much hope for people. And I think having a community and that kind of support is key. I mean, it shows trying to change habits. People are more successful when they have support, that they will end up staying with it. So I think, and
I have lots of people who might live quite a ways away, or they don't have computer experience. Although I think I don't think that we should say that patients who don't have a support, the reason that our group is so different, I feel that nobody else has ever spent 5.5 hours with them or talked to them 2 weeks before their course. I mean, they have got so much information. Plus, we give them the notebook, copies of our studies, all the experiences, every copy of every PowerPoint slide. They also get a video of the entire seminar that we filmed from an earlier one. So if they're out in Timbuktu and they don't have a support group, what have they done? They have learned exactly what they did to cause their disease. They don't need a support group. They know exactly what caused their disease. They know exactly the foods that are going to worsen it. Why, if they've got a brain in their head, do they have to have a support group? But I think that can sometimes be so overblown because the physicians are lazy and don't tell the patients the information they have to have. I mean,
right.
If you know that every time you eat a certain food, you're going to have horrible cramps in your stomach, you don't eat that food.
Right.
So if you can understand that when you eat these foods, you're going to worsen your disease. So I mean, I don't mean to take you to task with that. I don't want anybody to feel, unless they've got some wonderful support group, the hell, this is not the support group that makes the decision about what not to eat. You make the decision, and you know what it is that you shouldn't eat.
Right.
Isn't it fun to be excited about it?
But don't you think that it's so much easier now to have resources as far as like cooking classes, like virtual classes, or just cookbooks, or just resources? Back in the day, I don't think that was available. So I guess that's what I meant. Like there's so many ways to learn about it.
Back in the day, what was not available was physicians who would take the time to explain to the patient what is the causation of the illness.
Right. Well, we still have that going on, but I think a lot of times they really don't practice it themselves, and they don't.
I'm totally in agreement with you, but I just don't want to have anybody feel that unless they nestle into some support group, they're still just as empowered to get rid of this disease.
Right. Yeah. I think what's been awesome is the way you and the plant-based community have, educated so many more providers, and so many more people that are providing care are waking up to this. They are more aware of this. We are talking to our patients about it. And it's more focused on how many medications can we get you off of, as opposed to how many can we put you on. And I feel like that has progressed in the right direction somewhat. I know there's obviously not with everybody, but I think at least we're learning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, when people are switching over to a plant-based diet, I know you've probably heard this, it's all about this protein thing and how much protein and where are you going to get it. But I've kind of done some research on protein, and some of the evidence shows that really in middle age, we don't need that much protein. And in fact, it can actually increase our risk of dying from cancer and other causes. But protein is more beneficial or protective over the age of 65. We need to increase it. What are your thoughts on that? And since I know you're not a big advocate of nuts, mainly just, I think you said really, if you have heart disease, you're really not for nuts. I don't know if that is for everybody, but what do you recommend is the best source of protein then for people?
I don't like patients to have to ever eat by a calculator. How much protein do you feel that those who are living in rural China will calculate every day they have to have?
Right, that's true.
The same in Okinawa. Maybe they calculate it a little differently. Hell no.
Right.
You sit down and you eat. Right. How many people in rural China are protein deficient? Or in Central Africa?
Yeah.
Or how many of the Papua Highlanders are protein deficient.
Right.
You know, that's just kind of crazy. When you're eating a diet that is made up of grains loaded with protein, beans and legumes and lentils loaded with protein, vegetables with protein, potatoes, sweet potatoes, right? And regular potatoes and some fruit. You've got a delicious array of now literally hundreds and hundreds of wonderful recipes. You know what was interesting? When years ago, when Bill Connor, the late Bill Connor, wonderful physician, went down and studied the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, who thrive on the three sisters, beans, corn, and squash. Now, you suppose they sit down at every meal and really scratch their head and figure out, gosh, I wonder if we're a little short on protein.
No.
That's what they found.
Right.
No nutritional deficiencies at all. None.
Yeah.
So the message that I want, know the foods groups in which we want you to eat, and you dive into all these wonderful recipes that are available, and forget about the calculator. Look, the strongest human being on the planet today is a German, Baboudian. What does he eat? Whole food plant-based nutrition. Why is it we increasingly see professional athletes turning to whole food plant-based nutrition? Because they have found they have greater stamina and a quicker recovery time.
Everybody needs to watch The Game Changers, right? That was great.
That'll give you the answer.
That's right. I know. I just feel like so many people keep asking about it.
There's no male on earth who would see The Game Changers who wouldn't stop eating meat.
Right. I wanted to get your take on, there's been a lot of talk about vitamin D and heart disease. What do you feel like that's supplementing with vitamin D would be important for heart disease prevention, or what's your take on that?
How much vitamin D do the Tarahumara take?
That's true. But are they out in the sun a lot? Or, not only are we more sedentary, we don't go outside. We're on our computers and our phones. We work inside.
It was just a wonderful. I don't have it in my hands, but just 2 weeks ago, I'm a member of the American College of Cardiology. I was invited 5 years ago to join because they asked me to be part of their nutrition committee. Why? Because their nutrition committee is trying to educate the cardiologists about the causation of the illness that they've been designated to treat. But boy, is that a tough one. That's like trying to turn around the Queen Mary. But there's a wonderful 2 articles in the American Journal of Cardiology, issue about, must be 2 weeks ago, on supplements. David Jenkins and his team from Toronto. And guess what? Aside from B12, forget it.
Really?
Get it from your food.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask you about what supplements.
Because especially when you supplement with calcium, there are some studies that show how harmful that can be. Others that show that especially if you're taking a standard multivitamin, there's an earlier mortality. I mean, I would be really very cautious about. The thing that we suggest is I think that as far as vitamin D, the jury is still out.
Okay.
Because I think it's particularly harmful if I've seen some people that are taking 50,000 international units a day.
Yeah.
And there are some studies suggest that even horrible things like pancreatic cancer may come from that. Now, I suppose that it might be okay if you just took 1,000 or 2,000 international units, maybe bump yourself up to where the low level of normal is. But I think we just have to really pay attention to the fact that you have to look at, the body is literally, as you and I are sitting here, in our body are really thousands upon thousands upon chemical reactions going on all the time. And many of those chemical reactions require the use of a vitamin. Okay? Now, where does our body get the vitamin? Our intestine opens the door, and we'll usually take out of our food the amount of vitamin that we need. It doesn't take too much, doesn't take too little, it takes what we seem to need. Now, on the other hand, I like to use the example of, let's suppose that you have a symphony orchestra. You love to go to the symphony, but let's say that you're a billionaire and you found that what you really love are French horns. You think French horns are just incredible. So you decide you bought 300 additional musicians, all of whom blow the French horn. And the conductor puts those in, cranks it up, and it just sounds like crap. It's horrible. It is so out of balance. So if you say, gosh, I read something good about vitamin C, so I'm going to take 1,000. Or I have an A, I'll take another 1,000 there.
Right.
I'm going to really be so healthy, I'll take another 1,000. What you do is you absolutely, totally mess it up. So when careful studies are done, you actually end up looking like injuring yourself.
That makes sense. I think, people don't realize supplements still have chemical reactions in your body. It's not harmless taking stuff. Yeah, that's right. Well, also, I wanted to ask you about a typical day, like what you eat. What's your favorite thing to eat in a day?
Well, when you're married to somebody like Ann, it's all my meals are wonderful. I mean, I love my breakfast. I'm crazy about cereal, especially old-fashioned oats with some banana and raisin and raspberries and blueberries and strawberries and blackberries. I get a tremendous round of nutrients that are just so delicious. And I'm guilty of, I like it so much that sometimes before I go to bed, I'll have another bowl of cereal.
Well, obviously, it's serving you well.
Lunchtime, it's always, depending upon the season, if it's it may be an open-faced sandwich throughout the spring, summer, early fall, wintertime. Ann makes these wonderful soups that you can sort of walk on, and they're nutrient dense. Or many times we have these panini sandwiches that are filled with greens and hummus. And now lately, she's taking to growing a lot of different types of sprouts. So we are having, in the dark days of the pandemic, we're thriving on the addition of these sprouts, which probably sprouts have so packed with nutrition. Everything in that seed is going into you, and it's going to be wonderful. And then, at supper time, I have to say that my favorite of all time is beans and rice. And
I like beans and rice too.
on that, we'll go usually some peas and corn and tomato and mango, and it's just a whole bunch of other vegetables that really make it such a delicious treat.
Yeah. What about any sweets ever?
Occasionally Jane, my daughter, and Ann, they'll make a cookie.
Okay. I think there's people that can't imagine going a day without sweets. So, one quick thing I read, or I think you might even mention earlier, it's like what would be, like, I think tea you say is okay with caffeine, but what's wrong with coffee with caffeine? Because I know a lot of people live off coffee.
Yeah, how I got influenced in that. I don't know that, no, I'm not against green tea or black tea, and that has caffeine, but
okay.
I did both. There's a Greek study and a Italian study. I'll tell you, it was the Italian study that swayed me. That they took a group of young subjects, divided them in half, and one half would have coffee with caffeine. The other group would have coffee that was decaf. After they drank it, They then had the brachial artery tourniquet test done, which is a test for the endothelial production of nitric oxide. And then after they had the initial test, they would switch groups. So the group that was previously having coffee with caffeine was now decaf, and the group that was having decaf was now having coffee with caffeine. Then they would do the brachial artery tourniquet test again. Guess what? It was always the group that was having coffee with caffeine, which compromised and injured the endothelial production of nitric oxide.
Wow. That's good to know. I guess so many people rely on coffee.
Well, maybe they're doing, but if they're seriously ill, then this and they're doing many things to enhance their endothelial cells. This is perhaps one other thing that they could do to benefit from stopping the coffee, which is compromising.
Yeah. So I read your article, Is Oil Bad for You? And I just want to recommend that everybody reads that, because I know that's a big debate. But you, just to kind of summarize that, it's really olive oil, all of the oils really are harmful to our endothelial cells. They cause dysfunction.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Well,
and then
that's the whole reason I wrote the article, because when I didn't do any original studies there. What I simply did was summarize the data on how oils adversely impact the endothelium of animals as well as humans. And the bottom line is, why is it so important in the patients? And that's why I think that our results are, with all due humility, we will compete and compare our results with anybody on the planet. Now, I grant you, maybe somebody will say, well, nobody is as mean as you are. Well, okay. I accept that. I mean, if because the results are so exciting and so gratifying. And when you think about it, you don't really miss those foods that every time you eat them, they're going to punish you. Maybe they're going to give you a stroke.
Right.
They're going to give you a heart attack. Or they make it so you get pain in your extremities or injure your kidney. I mean, it's just crazy not to. You see, you're only as old as your blood vessels, and we want to make your blood vessels eternal. Right.
I agree. Well, I just want to commend you on a wonderful career you've had. You've been an Olympic gold medalist. That's an experience most of us will never have. So that's incredible. And a long career. You've been in movies, you've been an author, you've been a cardiologist, you've had great success. You're obviously a great role model for your family. The whole family is involved living this way. So it's seriously just a great example.
Well, Kim, one thing I want to just clarify. Remember that after I went into Vietnam, after I finished my surgical training, I was not a cardiologist. I was a general surgeon.
Okay.
And my tasks at the Cleveland Clinic were, I was chairman of the breast cancer task force, head of the section on thyroid and parathyroid surgery. But I always wanted to be very clear. I never want to be accused of being a cardiologist.
Okay.
Not that I don't have respect for my cardiovascular colleagues, but right. I think that not being a cardiologist really gave me a tremendous advantage in this disease, because otherwise, if you're a cardiologist, you get immediately hung up in all these procedures and drugs. And sadly, most of them have nothing whatsoever to do with the causation. What I simply did was, as a general surgeon, when I was reviewing the global literature, to me it was apparent. And the thing that was most provocative of all for me was the fact that there were multiple nations, cultures on the planet where this disease was non-existent. And I simply tried to take those kinds of diets, which we can Americanize and still eliminate the foods that were going to injure people, and put that to work, and seems to work.
You know, when people criticize the plant-based diet, I think, wow, these people that we're talking about, these centenarians, these people in the blue zones living to 100 and beyond, I mean, they're primarily eating a plant-based diet. So obviously they're doing a couple other things, which we didn't really get into. I mean, obviously exercise is crucial for increasing blood flow, nitric oxide, and adding some resistance is key as well. But primarily they're eating a plant-based diet. So clearly it's effective.
Kim, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to ask you what your vision or hope for the future of medicine is.
Well, I guess the reason that here I am, something like 20 years since I retired from surgery, I find myself really more enthusiastic than ever about the seismic revolution that is really right on the doorstep for medicine. And that seismic revolution is never going to come about with the invention of another pill, another procedure, or another operation. The seismic revolution that will come about is when we in the profession are willing to share with the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower the public as the locus of control to halt, reverse, and annihilate chronic illness.
That's awesome. You're right. You're so right. Thank you so much for being with me. I've had a really great time, and I've learned so much, and I just can't wait to share this with everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
And don't forget, I should have mentioned a little, maybe more reinforced, that is what I really rely on so much is the wonderful meals and books that Anne, my wife, and Jane, my daughter, have put together, because it's really very exciting. Also, if you go to YouTube, you can find some of the presentations that I've given that might give you a little bit more than you got today.
Yeah, I've listened to quite a few of them, and you're right. They're great about all aspects. And yeah, I forgot to mention, I wanted to know, these monthly seminars you're having, people just need to go to your website, and there's a place they can register for them?
The woman that orchestrates all the registration for our seminar is my wonderful secretary, Jackie Fry, and they can really reach her. If you go to my website, you'll find her phone number, and you'll find Jackie is very, really quite graceful and accommodating.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I think it's important people realize, it's like, even with this pandemic, it's like, don't wait until something happens. Don't wait till you already have the disease. Start now. Start with prevention.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Praise for what you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Take care.